I was born in Seoul. We immigrated to New York City when I was 3, so that was 1976, and grew up in the New York, New Jersey area, mostly in Jersey. It was interesting. I would say I was a Korean American Korean on the weekends and American on the weekdays. Part of my Korean identity that kept me in like part of like my culture was the Korean American church. And so we went to this church called Full Gospel New York Church in Manhattan. It was on 33rd Street, right across from Madison Square Garden. Bleeding from a head wound, my mom would still make me go to church, right? It doesn't matter like what happens. But that's where, I met Korean Americans like me, Korean families, ate Korean food, the picnics, the retreats, all those things. And so I grew up in New Jersey, went to high school there. And then when I graduated, I went to Rutgers University. When I graduated from Rutgers, I have a really useful history degree, can do a lot of things, as long as it's in the past and you want to write about it. But I actually got a job, surprisingly enough, at msnbc.com when they launched in 1996. And I got a job as a web developer. With a history degree, during that time, I just was able to teach myself HTML and like kind of mess around. And it was kind of neat to actually learn how things work, especially very new technology. And my friend was a headhunter in New York City, and he's like, hey, this Microsoft NBC News joint venture is starting. They're looking for HTML coders. Would you be interested in applying? I was like, I don't know. I don't think I'm qualified for that. He's like, I've seen your website, Frank, that you work on. I think you have a good shot. I was like, how much does it pay? And he's like, $25 an hour. And I was like, at that time in 1995, I was like blown away. I was like, oh my God. So I applied, got the job as a contractor. And then after about maybe half a year, they asked me to relocate to Redmond at Microsoft. And that's how I got to Seattle. But spent more time in Seattle than I did in New York, 24 years, and switched a lot of different careers. I've worked in a lot of sectors, startups in the tech industry after Microsoft. The bubble burst in 2002. I was actually out of a job for an entire year on unemployment, trying to get a job in the web technology field and just no jobs to be had. So it was 2002, right? And I also was in the shadow of 9/11 happening from New York. My brother lost his best friend in the World Trade Center bombing. This one older guy that I know from church who used to teach us how to play Ultimate and drive us in the van, take us to Central Park. It was a really nice older teacher. He was lost in the bombings. And then the recession hits and I get my, pink slip and they're, laid off. It was actually probably the worst year and a half of my life because in that time frame, I lost a job. My ex-girlfriend's mother was diagnosed with a inoperable brain tumor, and she passed 3 months after we broke up. Because of her illness, we were talking about getting married. So we're getting pushed to get married because she was like, I would love to see my daughter get married before I pass, which is really not a good reason to get married, right? But also how do you say no to someone that's asking you to marry her daughter? But then my mom also almost died. And she had a autoimmune condition where her body attacked her blood cells, red blood cells, and her platelets. So she had passed out in her bathroom, low blood count. Luckily, someone found her, neighbor, and then went to the hospital, got massive blood transfusions. And she was sick for about 15 years off and on. She passed in 2018. But during that moment where, I had this idea, when we broke up, I was like, maybe I had two roads. I can go back to New York, which I always intended to, right? I thought Seattle would be my university away from home because I went to school in state. And then the other choice is stay in Seattle and actually just explore your own identity, right? And don't live to this, whatever you think a Korean American Christian person is supposed to be, right? Explore Ultimate, play Ultimate more, make friends outside of the Korean American community. And that's what I did, right? I really dove into Ultimate, started coaching, playing. And that's where I had the willingness to be I got a job at Kaplan Test Prep and I taught SAT because I thought about teaching. And then I read these great books around teaching because I was thinking about applying for Teach for America. And I wrote all these educational equity novels. And I just got fired up about education and immigration and people of color and all these injustices. And then that led me to work in nonprofit. And I just knew whatever I did, I wanted to do something in the service of others. And so that was an 11-year career in nonprofits, education-based. And then public service, working in government. And then now what I'm doing now, but if it wasn't for those year and a half, 2 years, I don't know. I'd probably be in some room coding really poorly for Microsoft unless they fired me. It's interesting, like with the pandemic and like everything that was happening with the racial revolution and the reckoning in the United States, being an immigrant, being a person of color, while I was in the States, I didn't really feel like I belonged in either New York, New Jersey, or Seattle. I had friend groups that I really care about. I had like, these like sub communities of like ultimate frisbee players and things like that. And I really felt like loved and like cared for, and like there's like these like bouts of like like what now we call like microaggressions that I didn't know how to handle, didn't know that was like made me feel like self-conscious about my Korean identity or my Asian identity or my basically otherness. And so I remember I was at a really sweet like friends of mine, two white people in like the suburbs of Seattle. They invited me for Thanksgiving since I couldn't go home. There was this one aunt of theirs that was there, and nothing, she had not said anything to me the whole time. We sat down to eat, beautiful dinner spread, all the normal like trimmings, turkey, like mashed potatoes, stuffing. And we're about to dig in, and then she kind of looks at me across the table and she's like, "Have you ever had our kind of food before?" And the whole table, you can just see like everyone just kind of like, "Oh, why is she talking?" Right? And I looked at her and I was like, "Yes, I've had American food before. I've had turkey plenty of times." And then she's like, "Oh, that's good. That's great." Thinking back, like, should I have said something, right? Should I have said and made a big fuss out of it? I definitely have gotten into like arguments with people at like a party or bars or things like where people are like have an attitude of like exceptionalism, American exceptionalism, and like this identity around whiteness, and just like, and usually I try to not be like a belligerent about it. I try to ask questions like, why do you feel this way? Like, what makes you come to this opinion? But like in terms of like the larger stratosphere of like, what media portrays like Asian Americans as, what the microaggressions we hear, and then, I was here, but the spike in Asian American hate crimes, like those are all things that make me go look at the country that I have citizenship with and kind of be ashamed and a little happy to be here. And Korea, being Korean American in Korea, Koreans like look at me and they're like, "Well, yeah, you kind of look like us, but you're not really Korean." And I remember like I had an ex-girlfriend maybe 3, 4 years ago who said that to me very like blankly. She's like, "You're not Korean." And I was like taken aback. I was like, what do you mean I'm not Korean? I got really offended. I got defensive. And she explained really well, like, your parents left here in like the 70s. Like you grew up in a different country. Like, yes, like you eat the same food, you learn the language, but you didn't experience what it was like to grow up here, like as a full person, right? And this whole time. And I was like, that's true. So like, it's kind of all in the eye of the beholder, right? Like, and so like, I know Koreans here that I've met where I offer up, he's like, I'm not really Korean. And they'd be like, "What are you talking about? You're Korean. Like your parents are Korean. You're born here. You speak the language. It's not that great yet, but you're getting better." But like they're so accepting, right? It's I don't have the "how dare you say that" feeling anymore. Like I have a much more humble attitude about being in Korea. I want to learn. I have a very like humble opinion of like how I can do that. I don't expect people to like accept me as a full-fledged Korean at any time soon. In Korea, like I'm seen as Kyopo, like American, which is so funny, right? It's like, oh, I finally came to a country where they see me as American, but I'm not trying to be American. Like it's so weird. So, but I would say I feel way more comfortable here. And the only other answer I would put to that is I feel like I belong in like the ultimate frisbee community because I've been putting so much of my life into it. I coach, I play. I've actually coached the Korean American team, the Korean national team in 2015. And so, yeah, I really feel tied to that because a lot of my achievements have been in that field beyond work. But yeah, I definitely feel more like I belong here. I mentioned earlier that my mom passed in 2018, and I was a wreck, right? Like I didn't know what to do. My brother called me in Seattle, and I got on the plane that night. And she had passed in the evening, and she passed right before Mother's Day. So we had our funeral service the Saturday before Mother's Day, took Mother's Day off, and then buried her the day after Mother's Day. And all I knew is when I got back to Seattle was like, I am not equipped to do anything about this. Like, I don't know how to unpack it. I don't know how to resolve it or work through it. I need professional help. And so I went online and I First, I went online, and you can't actually look for therapists by race, ethnicity. But what I did, I knew I couldn't tell my story to like a white woman. As nice as she may be, I just had to talk to someone that can understand my experience as an immigrant, as an Asian American immigrant. And so what I did was you can actually search by language. So I just picked like Tagalog, like Japanese, like, everything that's Asian. And I found like a couple of people that went on the websites, and I looked for specifically grief counseling. And I found one, a Hawaiian, Japanese American therapist, and started, a weekly session. And that was just super enlightening, right? Because it's not like, you go to a therapist and they're like, here's this magic pill, right? There's this silver bullet. They make you answer questions that you kind of don't ever want to answer. They make you open up suitcases that you never wanted to take out of the closet, right? As I went through that process, it was like the way I saw myself and the way I was way more gentle with myself. There is no right way to grieve or wrong way to grieve. It's however you take it. Like, don't feel bad if you didn't think about your mom like this week. It doesn't mean you're a bad son. Like, and it was just helped me like get in touch with that. So I think if anyone's watching this, be it however you identify, like having someone to talk to, be a professional would be great, but even like good friends that you can like be honest with, like I think it makes your life so much easier. My name is Frank Nam, and this is my Korean American story.